"Can I get a ride to my graduation ceremony?" That's all the poor girl could whisper on the freezing curb of Eastwood Avenue, her voice trembling as she begged a stranger for a chance at the life she'd fought tooth and blood for. Completely unaware, he was a CEO billionaire whose reaction would leave her and everyone watching absolutely speechless. On that rain-soaked morning, Hannah Cole stood small, soaked, and exhausted, clutching a single wrinkled notice that threatened to erase 4 years of her struggle, while the world hurried past her without seeing her at all. But the moment the powerful man in the tailored suit stepped out of his sleek black sedan, something in her chest pulled hard like fate calling her name, yet she didn't know who he was, what he carried, or why he paused when he saw her, as if recognizing a story he'd lived before. And when their eyes locked, her desperation meeting his unreadable calm questions burst open like lightning. Why? Her? Why now? Why did the CEO billionaire slow down for a poor girl begging for a ride to her graduation ceremony? And what would happen when he learned the truth behind her request? The rain on Eastwood Avenue didn't fall, it whipped. Cold, sharp, sideways. It found every gap in Hannah Cole's jacket, stung her cheeks, soaked her hair until it clung to her neck in dark ropes. Umbrellas darted past her like gliding black shields, people disappearing beneath them without ever glancing her way. Cars hissed through puddles, spraying icy water at her shins. The wind stole her breath each time she tried to exhale. And still, she walked. Her fingers tightened around the wrinkled paper in her hand, the $100 diploma hold notice. Final, payment due. Those words glared up at her like they were mocking her. $100, after 4 years of clawing through school, juggling overnight shifts at Layton's grocery, cleaning offices on weekends, and skipping meals more times than she'd ever admit. Her future, her degree, her right to stand on stage tomorrow rested on a stupid, humiliating, impossible $100. She pressed the paper to her chest, shielding it from the rain as if protecting the last piece of her life that hadn't fallen apart. Her breath clouded in front of her. Her shoes, cheap canvas ones she'd bought secondhand, were soaked through, the soles almost peeling. Her socks squished with each step. Her backpack strap dug into her shoulder where the stitching had begun to tear. Everything she owned seemed to be falling apart at the same time, as if conspiring against her. "Just keep walking," she whispered to herself. "Just keep breathing." But each block she passed made the lump in her throat swell, the truth gnawed inside her. By tonight, if she didn't find a way to get that $100 and get across the city to campus before the registrar closed, she wouldn't graduate. She'd have to watch her classmates, some who had never worked a day in college, celebrate and post smiling photos while she stayed home, invisible, forgotten, like she'd never existed on campus at all. Her eyes burned. She blinked hard. Hannah had fought too long, struggled too hard, survived too much to lose everything now. Not after nights doing homework on break between stocking shelves. Not after losing her mother sophomore year and going to class the next morning because attendance counted for 10% of her grade. Not after selling her grandmother's locket, the only thing she had left of her to pay rent one awful month. But today felt like the world was daring her to break. Her teeth chattered, yet her shame burned hotter than the cold. Because as she reached the next intersection, Eastwood and Lark, she realized she had run out of ideas. Her bank account was empty. Her coworkers couldn't help. Her last paycheck wasn't due until next week, and she had walked 5 miles in the rain because her bus card had no credit left, which meant only one option remained, something she never imagined she'd even consider: asking strangers. Her stomach twisted violently at the thought. She had always prided herself on standing on her own. She never wanted pity, never wanted charity. But pride didn't get diplomas released. Pride didn't get graduation robes picked up. Pride didn't get her on stage tomorrow to honor the promise she'd made her mother on her hospital bed. "I'll finish. I swear I will." A car slowed near the curb. A sleek, glossy black sedan, so clean the rain slid off it like it wasn't allowed to cling. She watched it, a strange flicker of hope sparking in her chest. Maybe someone inside was being dropped off. Maybe. Then she shook her head hard. No, she couldn't. She couldn't just walk up to someone's car and ask for help. What would she even say? "Hi, sorry to bother you, but can I borrow $100? Also, can I hitch a Ride across the city to my graduation ceremony tomorrow. I promise I'm not crazy. Ridiculous. Humiliating. Her cheeks burned even thinking about it. She kept walking, but the notice in her hand felt heavier with each step. She read it again through blurred vision. Final payment due. $100. Failure to pay will result in diploma hold. Her stomach knotted so tight she thought she might throw up. A bus roared by, sending a gutter wave splashing against her legs. She flinched. Water dripped into her shoes. She whispered, "Mom, what do I do?" The wind answered. Just when she thought she might collapse right there on the sidewalk, kneeling in the downpour, the world shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, simply shifted. Because the sleek black sedan she'd seen earlier didn't drive away. It pulled forward, slowed, stopped at the curb directly ahead of her. Through the rain-smeared window, she saw a silhouette, broad-shouldered, composed, unmoving. A strange chill slid down her spine. Why stop here? Why now? And why? Why did something inside her whisper that she should pay attention? Hannah stood there trembling not only from the cold, but from a feeling she couldn't name. A feeling that tomorrow's graduation, her entire future, even her life, was about to depend on whoever stepped out of that car. The sedan's back door opened with a soft, deliberate click, almost swallowed by the rain. Hannah froze mid-step, her heart knocking hard against her ribs as a man stepped out slowly, purposefully like he wasn't bothered by the storm slicing across Eastwood Avenue. He straightened to his full height, and for a moment Hannah forgot how to breathe. His presence was startling, not because he was handsome, though he was, strikingly so, but because he carried himself with a quiet force that made the chaotic street around him feel suddenly organized, almost still. He wore a charcoal gray tailored suit that fit him like it was made for him, the fabric somehow untouched by the rain. His tie was a deep navy, his shoes polished to a reflective shine. His dark hair was slicked back, not a strand out of place despite the wind, and his eyes sharp, observant, unsettlingly calm swept the street once before settling on her. Her breath hitched. She felt it all at once, the pull, the strange, inexplicable tug in her chest, like something in him recognized something in her that she didn't even know she was showing. He didn't speak. He didn't rush. He simply looked at her, really looked, as if he already sensed the story she was carrying in her shivering stance, her soaked clothes, her clenched hand guarding that wrinkled notice. Hannah immediately dropped her gaze, ashamed of how small she must look in front of someone like him, someone who clearly belonged to a world where storms were inconveniences, not threats, someone who had probably never walked Eastwood Avenue in the rain, much less worried about $100. She tried to step aside to let him pass, but her foot slipped slightly on the wet pavement. Her worn shoe squelched pitifully. He noticed. Her face flamed. "Don't do it. Don't say anything. Don't embarrass yourself." Her pride clawed wildly inside her. But the image of the notice final payment due flashed in her mind again. Her mother's voice echoed. Tom Callahan, the registrar clerk who'd signed an apology yesterday, echoed. "If you can't pay it, we can't release your diploma, Hannah." Her dream, 4 years of exhaustion and sacrifice, echoed. She swallowed so hard it nearly hurt. This was it, her last option. And she hated that it had come to this, hated it so violently her eyes stung. She forced her trembling fingers to unclench. She tightened her other hand around the backpack strap to keep herself steady. Then she stepped forward. The man's gaze didn't waver. "Excuse me," she began, her voice cracking embarrassingly. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Excuse me, sir." He took one step closer, not threatening, not invasive, just close enough to show he was listening. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her legs almost buckled beneath her. But she kept going because she had to. I know you don't know me," she said, hating how shaky her words were. "And this is probably the strangest thing you'll hear all day, but She stopped. Shame hit her like a wave. This was wrong, ridiculous. He would laugh, or walk away, or get annoyed at being bothered by a drenched nobody on a random street. For a second, she almost turned and ran, but he tilted his head slightly, not impatiently, but encouragingly, as if silently telling her, "Go on." She inhaled sharply. She tried again. I need help. The words were barely a whisper, but they scraped her throat raw. He blinked once. What kind of help? His voice was low, smooth, controlled. An unexpected warmth thrummed beneath it. Hannah's hands shook. She opened them to show him the notice, crinkled, damp, falling apart at the edges. I need $100. Her stomach twisted violently. It's for my diploma. They won't let me walk at graduation tomorrow unless I pay. And I don't have it. I've tried everything. She couldn't stop the tears that slipped down her cheeks, whether from rain or humiliation. She wasn't sure. And I'm sorry. She rushed out. I know it's insane to ask a stranger. I know it's none of your responsibility. But she gestured vaguely at him. You seemed like someone who might not miss it, and someone who might understand what it costs to lose something you've worked this hard for. The words burst out of her all at once, raw and trembling and painfully honest. The man studied her, not the way judgmental people did, not with pity, not with irritation. He studied her like she was a puzzle he needed time to solve. His eyes drifted to her shoes, her soaked jacket, her shaking hands, the paper she clutched like it was a life raft. Then his gaze lifted back to meet hers. She held her breath, waiting for him to walk away, or lecture her, or offer polite sympathy before shutting her down. Instead, he asked quietly, "Why me?" Her lips parted. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. "Out of everyone on this street," he continued softly, "why did you choose me?" Her heartbeat thrummed painfully. She didn't hesitate. "Because," she said, her voice trembling but true, "you looked like someone who wouldn't miss the money, but would understand the loss." Something flickered just for a second in his eyes. Recognition? Pain? Memory? She couldn't tell. But she knew one thing. He wasn't walking away. Not yet. For a long, breath-held second, the rain became the only sound between them. The city blurred around the edges, cars splashing past, umbrellas darting by, while Hannah stood trembling in her soaked clothes, waiting for the stranger's verdict. The man in the tailored suit didn't speak. He simply studied her, the same way someone might study a piece of art whose meaning kept shifting with every glance. His gaze lowered again, lingering on her worn canvas shoes. The right sole curved upward just slightly, threatening to detach any moment. He took in the frayed edges of her jeans, the uneven stitching on her jacket sleeve where she'd repaired it in her dorm, the dark strands of drenched hair clinging to her neck, the paper wilting in her shaking grip. Then he looked back at her face. Not at her tears. He didn't seem interested in her breaking. He looked at the part of her still trying desperately not to break. He tucked his hands into his coat pockets and asked, in a tone so steady it almost unnerved her, "You're graduating tomorrow?" She nodded. "If I can pay the hold." "And you've done everything you can?" "I've sold everything I can sell," she whispered. "I've worked every shift anyone would give me. I've asked my professors. I've checked the aid office. Her voice faltered. "I ran out of doors to knock on." He watched her carefully, and she couldn't decipher what he was looking for: truth, integrity, desperation, pride, all of it. "And you came to me," he said, not asking a question but examining the words as though they carried weight. "Yes," she said softly. "Why?" "I told you why. I want you to tell me again." His eyes locked on hers, and the intensity in them made her feel seen in a way that scared her, exposed her, almost lifted her. Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. "Because you looked like someone who wouldn't miss $100, but wouldn't ignore what losing something you earned does to a person." A breath escaped him, barely audible, and for a moment his expression changed, just a flicker, a shadow passing behind his composed exterior. She didn't know what memory moved in him, but something had struck. He looked at the notice in her hands again. "May I?" She hesitated, then gave it to him. His fingers brushed hers, lightly warm despite the cold, and she pulled back as though the contact had startled her. A strange jolt shot up her arm. He didn't seem bothered. He unfolded the wrinkled paper with the same care someone might give to something fragile. He read every word. She watched his eyes move over the page. They hardened slightly at the edges. Not in annoyance, more like disapproval at the institution that had issued it. When he finished, he folded it neatly and returned it to her. "You worked for this degree," he said. It wasn't a question. "I tried," she murmured. "No," he corrected gently. "You fought." Her chest tightened, and then unexpectedly he looked at her shoes again. The silence stretched. Her heartbeat quickened because she saw something shift in his posture. A decision forming, but it wasn't the one she expected. He slowly reached down and unfastened the laces of his polished Oxford shoes. Hannah's eyes widened. What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He stepped back slightly, lifted one foot, and slid it out of the gleaming shoe. Then the other. The rain misted his socks, darkening the fabric instantly. He didn't flinch. He stood barefoot on the wet pavement in a $1,000 suit, holding shoes easily worth more than her monthly rent. Hannah stared, unable to form a single coherent thought. "Here." He held the shoes toward her. She looked between the shoes and his steady expression. I don't understand." "You said you need to walk at your graduation tomorrow," he said. "You said you've done everything you can. You said you've earned a said." Her throat tightened. He stepped closer, still barefoot in the rain, and placed the shoes gently into her hands. "Wear these." Her mouth fell open. I can't take your shoes." "Yes, you can. But I asked for money, not—" "I know what you asked for," he said calmly. "And we'll talk about that tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" she echoed. He nodded. "Graduation day. After you walk." She stared up at him, utterly stunned. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't pitying her. He wasn't amused. His expression was grounded, certain, almost protective. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, voice breaking. The faintest softness entered his eyes, but only for a heartbeat. "Because sometimes," he said quietly, "people need more than money to step into the life they've earned." Her legs nearly gave out. He turned, opened the back door of the sedan, and slid inside, still barefoot. The driver glanced back in confusion but said nothing. Before the car door closed, the man met her eyes one more time. A silent promise passed between them, one she didn't understand yet, but felt deeply. "We'll talk tomorrow," he repeated. Then the door shut. The sedan pulled away, leaving Hannah on the sidewalk, soaked, shivering and clutching a pair of polished Billionaire's shoes she hadn't asked for, but suddenly couldn't let go of. For the rest of the night, Hannah replayed every second of what happened, each frame too surreal to belong to her life. The rain, the stranger, the suit, his eyes, his voice, his shoes in her hands, his leaving barefoot, as if the cold didn't touch him, as if nothing mattered except whatever silent promise he had made. She barely slept. Every time she drifted off, she jolted awake, half believing it had all been a hallucination born from exhaustion and despair. But each time her gaze fell on the pair of polished Oxfords on her floor, gleaming faintly in the early dawn. Light her breath caught. The shoes were real, heavy, impossibly expensive, a symbol of something she didn't understand yet. And now, in the cold gray of morning, she sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at them. "Did that really happen?" she whispered to the empty room. Silence answered. She touched one of the shoes. The leather was smooth, warm from the radiator nearby. Her fingers trembled as she traced the stitching. The craftsmanship nothing like the shoes she'd worn the past 4 years. Those had been work shoes, cheap shoes, shoes that soaked through in the rain. Survival shoes. These felt like shoes built for a different world, a world she'd never belonged to. Her stomach twisted. Today was graduation day. The day she'd dreamed about and feared she'd lose. The day she was supposed to step onto a stage and claim the degree she'd dragged herself through storms, literal and otherwise, to earn. But wearing his shoes, the thought made her chest clench painfully. She felt pride and shame and awe and fear all tangled together. What would people think? What would he think? Why did he give them to her in the first place? And what did he want to talk about after graduation? She rubbed her hands over her face. "This is insane," she muttered. But the memory of him standing barefoot in the rain, unflinching, composed, looking at her like she mattered, kept echoing inside her. Hannah forced herself to stand. She showered, combed her damp hair, and put on her simple graduation dress, a soft navy cotton piece she'd altered herself from a thrift store find. She slipped on the gown she'd picked up weeks ago, when she still believed everything would go smoothly. Then she stared at the shoes one more time. "I don't know what any of this means," she whispered. "But you said I needed more than money to step into the future I earned." Her chest ached. "And I want to believe you." She reached down, lifted the shoes, and placed them carefully on her feet. They were slightly big, but when she tightened the laces, they held her firmly secure, grounded, powerful in a way she'd never felt before. Her breath shuddered out. She grabbed her bag, locked the door behind her, and headed out into the brightening morning. The bus ride to campus was crowded with students in gowns and parents chattering excitedly. Hannah kept her gaze low, one hand gripping the cool metal pole, the other brushing lightly over the borrowed shoes, as if unsure they were still there. Each stop brought more polished, confident students aboard, girls in glossy heels and boys in crisp ties. Their laughter sparkled. Their futures looked effortless. Hannah felt like a shadow among them. When the bus finally pulled up to Crestwood University's main loop, her chest tightened so painfully she had to pause on the sidewalk. Students surged past her, hugging, taking photos, greeting family. She stood still, clutching her bag, the weight of her 4-year battle pressing on her shoulders. "You don't belong here." The thought sliced deep. Her eyes stung. But then she remembered the man's voice. "You fought. Not you survived. Not you managed. You fought." She breathed through the ache and forced her legs forward, step by borrowed step. When she reached the academic quad, a familiar voice called out, "Hannah?" She turned. Professor Kelsey, her capstone advisor, hurried toward her with a motherly smile breaking across her face. "Oh, thank goodness, I was worried sick. They told me about the hold. I thought you might not make it." Hannah swallowed hard. "I figured it out." Professor Kelsey's eyes softened instantly. She reached out, touched Hannah's arm. "You earned this more than most students I've taught in the last 20 years. Your resilience, your heart, your work ethic. I've bragged about you in faculty meetings." Hannah blinked, rapidly. Why?" "Because you remind me of who this school is supposed to be for," the professor said warmly. "And because you're the kind of graduate who changes lives, starting with your own." A tear slipped down Hannah's cheek. Professor Kelsey squeezed her arm. "Now go. Walk proudly. You deserve this moment." Hannah nodded, throat burning, and headed toward the graduation hall. But with every step she took, something pulled her gaze away toward the guest section, toward the high-ranking visitors sitting near the front. A strange feeling prickled down her spine, and then she saw him, seated among distinguished guests in the front row, immaculate in another perfectly tailored suit. The man from Eastwood Avenue, barefoot no longer, composed, watching the hall with an unreadable expression, watching her. Their eyes met his steady, hers wide, and he gave her the faintest nod. A shockwave rolled through her chest. She wasn't dreaming. He'd come. He'd kept his word. The borrowed shoes grounded her, anchoring her to the moment. She inhaled sharply and stepped into her future.